Have you ever wondered if there's a best method or methods for learning another language? People differ greatly on this. Some will say the whole reason they could never learn to speak a foreign language properly was the method that was used at school put them off. A bit like the way that people say studying poetry at school made them hate poetry because they had to analyse and pull it to bits. Somehow the idea that you had to drill language and grammar and so on sticks in the mind as something negative for many people. Other people say they loved it. What got me thinking about this was that Alexander Argelies, and I probably say his name perhaps not the way he says it, but how it looks to me, who's well known on YouTube and well known as an amazing language person, did a recent video on the question of memorisation. It got me thinking a lot about the methods by which I first learned foreign languages. So today I'm going to talk about how you might have learned in the past and in future videos what happened across the years and how you might learn now. These things change with time, and I'm not by any means a nostalgia freak, but sometimes we throw babies out with bathwater in language teaching, and certain things from the past that were useful might become useful again. One of the pluses, one of the compensations about becoming older and being a long-term language learner as well as an older language learner is that you see many of these methods come and go. So I'll share some of that experience with you today. Back when I was in secondary school, what we call high school here in Western Australia, but junior high school, we used at first a textbook and a method that had to do with the audiolingual idea. So this is an old original textbook from that era. You can still get these from secondhand book sources online, though it would be difficult to get the sound files or vinyl discs or reel-to-reel tapes or even possibly cassette tapes that went with it. I'll open up to Unit 1 so you can see the kind of thing we had here. You'd have illustrations, very simple dialogue in both French and English. I should add that at the school where I began, you were only allowed to choose one language. Two languages were offered, French and German at that stage. And that secondary school, still all these years later, that was 1977 when I started, they still offer German there, though I believe they don't offer French anymore. So languages have persisted there, which is rather unusual for a Western Australian school. This method was, as I say, connected to sound files. And I have here also the German one. I didn't take German at school, but I happen to have the textbook from the same era. Again, with the idea inside each chapter, there's Unit 3, basic dialogue. And the sound files matched exactly what was in the dialogues in the book. Very Americanized, so basic dialogue with an L-O-G, which that and the 1960s photographs in there, because we were in the 1970s, of course, so we were very modern, made the students laugh a lot and maybe distracted a lot of us from learning. But they were very effective at making you repeat and memorize. You might wonder, what is the use of memorizing dialogues that you may not use? What actually happens with that method is that they become a kind of pattern in your mind. I can still actually remember some of those dialogues even without looking at the book, and this is a very, very long time afterwards, the French one I mean. And then as the chapters went on, you would have exercises that were kind of patterned responses, drills, resembling the dialogues but changing some of the details. So you were learning the grammar and how to ring the changes on a sentence after listening. There were also written exercises. I also have here somewhere actually a teacher's edition of the same textbook, ALM French Teacher's Edition. That would sit on the desk of the teacher in our era with all these mysterious blue pages that explained things. They're faint blue, you can't really see it on here, that explained things for the teacher, the secret bits that were not in our book that gave the answers. But it's essentially the same content, just with amplification. As I say, these can be obtained secondhand online. It would be, though, difficult to get the listening side of it, although they are out there. But to get the technology on which to play them might be another matter, depending where you are. After the basic dialogue section, which would usually be trying to teach you something cultural about maybe life in France, and then you can see people at dinner, and the dialogue there is called avant le dîner, before dinner. Then you'd have a supplement giving you alternative vocabulary that could have been slotted into the sentences, questions based on what you had heard and read, free sentence completion, and then in each chapter, quite nicely laid out in clean text, you can see the underlinings there from the old days with pencil, of grammar, explaining the grammar. So each chapter would move you ahead a slight amount, but you'd get very substantial patterns that you could learn, like the conjugation there of the verb travailler in the present tense. Further on in the book, there was something that I always flicked forward to, even when I was quite a beginner, that was very stimulating to the imagination, which was a kind of visual section. I'll just show you the opening photograph there, Glimpses of France, which is really quite lovely, even though it's a little faded now after all these years, and you'd have maps, anecdotes about the different regions with quite lovely photographs. And if you were distracted and not listening in class, there was lots to dip into here, where people live and so on. That's just to give you an idea of what the level 1 French ALM looks like, and the German one is laid out in a similar fashion. As I say, they're quite dated in terms of actual information, but they're still the structures, the grammar, and how the language tends to work are still very relevant. You can never have a textbook, even one that's online, that remains permanently valid. Language changes so much that everything's going to become dated eventually. But that doesn't mean we should actually discard everything there is to learn from old methods and old textbooks. Along with these books, we had a language lab, which was essentially in the same classroom. It was a strip of desks that had carols on them, so slightly soundproofed or buffered kind of little cubes that we sat in with headphones, and built-in tape player. It was cassette tapes in my era that you could control the sound with to some degree. The teacher had absolute control though. And a lot of mischief went on in those carols where people were not at all doing what they were supposed to be doing. But nevertheless, some of us actually did French. And so very much the listening and speaking came alongside the reading and the writing. I'll give you an example of why the Arguelles video on memorization made me think of this early method from the late 1970s. So 1977 I began. It's because a lot of the actual committing to memory of grammar structures was done through drills as a form of memorizing. So just to take at random from Unit 11 in the first book, turning a noun phrase to a pronoun. So you would have Anne raconte une histoire à Brigitte. So Anne tells a story to Brigitte. And they would model for you to say Elle lui raconte une histoire. Elle lui raconte une histoire. And then elle raconte une histoire à Alain. Elle lui raconte une histoire. Elle raconte une histoire à sa mère. Elle lui raconte une histoire. Then it changes to plural, so elle raconte une histoire à ses frères. Elle leur raconte une histoire. And it would go on like that. And you'd get this not too fast, but even to the point where sometimes you could switch your brain off for a while to the content, to the actual meaning, roughly, and just get the pattern like a kind of music. And I think there's a lot to be said for certain things, much like the times tables in maths, to be committed to your memory as a kind of music, which you can then retrieve when you want to speak. I'm interested to know what you think of that as a method, because it went very much against the grain eventually of what became the norm in language studies in schools, in universities and elsewhere. So that's today's video on the ALM method as used in these texts that I had at school, and the German one as well, and probably countless other languages. I'm interested to hear if you've ever used these books, if you've ever acquired them later and tried to use them, or similar methods. There's a whole history behind how the method was developed, which I may go into another time. But at the moment, it's just the first one in a series of these videos I'm going to do, looking at different methods. So let me know what you think in the comments, and please do subscribe.